She had done everything right. Worked for 40 years. Saved carefully. Trusted the right people. And in December 2008, she discovered that the money was gone. Not lost in a market crash. Not caught in a bad investment. Gone. Taken. By a man she had trusted completely. A man her friends had trusted. A man the government had investigated and cleared. Her name is one of 37,000. 37,000 people who handed their savings, their retirements, their futures to Bernard Lawrence Madoff. And got back nothing but a fabricated statement and a very long lie. This is his story, and every fact you are about to hear is on the court record. Bernie Madoff was born in 1938 in Queens, New York. He did not come from money. His father was a plumber who later dabbled in finance. His mother briefly ran a small brokerage from their home, one that was eventually sanctioned by regulators for failing to file proper financial reports. He was not a remarkable student. He attended Hofstra University, studied political science, and had no obvious path to greatness. But he had something. He made people feel safe, warm, steady, reassuring, in a room full of louder, more aggressive personalities. Bernie Madoff had a stillness about him that people found deeply comforting. It was at Hofstra that he met Ruth Alpern. Smart, sharp, and from a good family. Her father, Saul Alpern, was a respected accountant, and he was not entirely convinced by this young man with no money and no connections. But Ruth chose Bernie, and from that moment on, Bernie Madoff had something to prove. In 1960, Madoff was 22 years old. He had saved $5,000 working as a lifeguard and installing sprinkler systems. He used it to start Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. In the beginning, it was entirely legitimate. He became a market maker, buying and selling stocks and providing liquidity between buyers and sellers. Wall Street looked down on him. He was an outsider, not from a prestigious firm, not from an Ivy League school, from Queens. So he found an edge. Technology. While Wall Street still operated on paper and shouting, Madoff invested in computers. He became a pioneer of electronic trading and helped develop the infrastructure that would eventually become the NASDAQ stock exchange. He served as its non-executive chairman. His legitimate business made real money. Enough to buy houses, join a boat club, live well. Enough to look his father-in-law Saul Alpern in the eye and say, without words, "I told you." For a while, there was nothing to disbelieve. Nobody knows the exact moment the fraud began. Some say it was $30,000, but what the record strongly suggests is that it started with a single act of weakness. In the early days of his investment advisory business, Madoff took client money, invested it in the market, and lost it. He could not face telling the truth, because Bernie Madoff would rather look like a liar than look like a failure. He went to his father-in-law Saul Alpern and borrowed $30,000. He used it to cover the losses and make the accounts whole. And in doing so, something unexpected happened. While every other investor around him was struggling, his clients saw no losses. They saw a man who was somehow untouchable. He had not planned to build a Ponzi scheme. He had planned to cover one bad period and make it right. But the cover worked too well. The reputation grew too fast. And every month that followed, the weight of expectation made the exit more terrifying than continuing. So the fabrication continued. Month after month, year after year, one $30,000 lie that would eventually swallow $65 billion. As the decades passed, Madoff built something extraordinary. Two businesses, running simultaneously, in the same building. His offices were at 885 3rd Avenue in Manhattan, a building known as the Lipstick Building. He operated across 2 floors. One floor ran the legitimate market-making business, busy, loud, real trades, real money. The other floor was where the fraud lived. Quieter, controlled, access restricted. It is worth being clear. The specifics of exactly which floor did what have been reported differently across various accounts. What is documented is that the two operations were deliberately kept separate. One was real, one was not. The fraudulent side generated fake trade confirmations, invented returns, and manufactured account statements that were printed, sealed in envelopes, and mailed to clients around the world. Madoff never gave clients electronic access to their accounts. Everything was paper. Mailed. Paper is controllable. Paper can be manufactured. Paper does not have a system log. Within the operation was a section known as the cage, where the paperwork was processed and controlled. At the center of it all was a man named Frank D. Pascali. He had started working for Madoff as a teenager with no formal qualifications, but he was completely loyal. Over the years, he became the operational heart of the fraud, managing the numbers, running the statements, keeping the fiction alive. He later cooperated with federal investigators, and his testimony became one of the most critical pieces of the prosecution's case. The fraudulent floor was a machine, sophisticated, carefully maintained, extraordinarily long-running, built to produce one thing: the appearance of legitimacy. In the years before Madoff became a household name, two accountants played a critical role in feeding his operation. Frank Avellino and Michael Biens had worked with Saul Alpern and continued his practice of referring clients to Madoff after he retired. They raised money from investors and funneled it directly to Bernie. They were not registered investment advisors. They had no legal authority to do what they were doing. Eventually, the SEC came knocking, and when questioned, Avellino and Biens pointed regulators directly at Madoff. The SEC looked. Madoff fabricated documents that appeared entirely legitimate. The SEC found nothing and closed the investigation. They forced Avellino and Biens to shut down and return approximately $440 million to clients. But that money was not sitting in an account. It was inside the scheme. So Madoff wrote the checks himself, borrowed the money, and made the clients whole. And then something extraordinary happened. The clients did not want the money back. They begged to stay invested. So instead of Avellino and Biens pooling money to Madoff, individual investors began coming to him directly. The SEC investigation that should have ended everything had instead given Bernie Madoff an accidental seal of approval. If regulators had looked and found nothing, he must be exactly who he said he was. The fraud did not just survive. It grew because of it. Madoff refined his approach to attracting money into something almost elegant. He joined the Palm Beach Country Club, one of the wealthiest communities in the United States, and used it as a quiet hunting ground for new investors. Access to Bernie Madoff was a privilege. You did not approach him. You were brought to him by someone he trusted, who vouched for you. It felt like he was doing you a favor, and once you were in, you did not ask questions. If anyone pushed too hard, Madoff would look at them calmly and say, "If you want your money back, I'll send it back." Not aggressive, not defensive, just calm. And every time, the client would back down immediately. No, Bernie. Keep it. Keep doing what you're doing. Some trusted him because he was Jewish and many of his clients shared that identity. Others trusted him because someone they deeply respected had vouched for him. Others, because the SEC had already looked and found nothing. Whatever the reason, the trust was total, and Madoff exploited it completely. He also demanded secrecy. Clients were not permitted to disclose his name or discuss their involvement. If they broke that rule, he would return their money and cut them off. No exceptions. The secrecy that should have been a red flag only deepened the sense of exclusivity. Here is where the story becomes genuinely complicated, because Bernie Madoff, the man his employees knew, was not a monster. He paid for his employees' honeymoons. When a staff member needed heart surgery they could not afford, Madoff paid for it. He gave generously to charities, to Jewish causes, to medical research. His office was described as a family environment. People loved working there. And yet there was another side, a need for control that ran through everything. Those who knew him well describe a man who could be warm one moment and utterly cold the next. There were many Bernies, those close to him would later say. The generous employer, the ruthless operator, the loving husband, the systematic fraudster. All of them real, all of them the same man. And perhaps that is the most unsettling thing of all, because we want fraudsters to be obviously evil. We want there to have been signs. But Bernie Madoff genuinely cared about certain people, gave real money to real causes, and destroyed real lives. All at the same time. For decades. In 1999, a financial analyst named Harry Markopolos was asked to study Madoff's returns. Within hours, he knew something was wrong. The numbers were not just impressive, they were mathematically impossible. No legitimate strategy in any market condition could produce the consistency Madoff was showing. Markopolos went to the Securities and Exchange Commission. In 2000, he filed a formal complaint naming Madoff directly. The SEC investigated, found nothing. He submitted again in 2001. Nothing. In 2005, he submitted a document titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." It contained 29 specific red flags. Detailed, mathematical, specific. The SEC assigned 2 junior investigators, fresh out of school, who sat down with Madoff himself. He attended the meeting personally. Calm, cooperative, completely convincing. He gave them names and phone numbers to verify his trading activity. They never called them. Madoff later said he had expected to be caught. He had handed investigators everything they needed to unravel him, and they had not pulled the thread. He walked out of that building and continued the fraud for another 3 years. A subsequent congressional investigation found the SEC's failures were systemic. Lack of expertise, internal bureaucracy, and an institutional inability to believe that someone of Madoff's stature could be doing what Markopolos was describing. His reputation, the very thing he had built the fraud upon, protected him from the people whose job it was to stop him. In September 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed. The global financial system fractured, and investors, desperate for cash, began demanding their money back from everyone, including Bernie Madoff. Withdrawal requests totaling approximately $7 billion flooded in. $7 billion Madoff did not have, because it had never been invested. On the evening of the 9th of December, 2008, he called his sons to his apartment. Mark and Andrew Madoff both worked at the firm in the legitimate division. Neither, according to all available evidence, had any knowledge of the fraud. Their father sat them down and told them the truth. He called it, in his own words, one big lie. His sons left that night, called a lawyer, and the following morning reported their father to federal authorities. On the 11th of December, 2008, FBI agents arrived at Madoff's Manhattan penthouse. They asked if there was an innocent explanation. He looked at them and said, "There is no innocent explanation." He was arrested, 70 years old, in his own home. The lie finally was over. On the 12th of March, 2009, Madoff stood before Judge Denny Chin and pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies. Securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, perjury, false filings with the SEC, 11 counts. Guilty to all. In his statement, he admitted he had never made a single legitimate trade for his advisory clients. That every return on every statement for every client for decades was fabricated. He said in his own words from the court record, "I knew what I was doing was wrong, indeed criminal." In the courtroom gallery, victims sat in silence. Elie Wiesel, Nobel Peace Prize laureate and Holocaust survivor, had his foundation's entire $15 million endowment taken. He called Madoff a thief and a scoundrel and said he would never financially recover. Thierry de la Villehutchet, a French financier who had introduced significant European money to Madoff, locked himself in his office 12 days after the arrest and took his own life. He left a note saying he felt responsible for his clients' losses. On the 29th of June, 2009, Judge Chin sentenced Madoff to 150 years in federal prison. He had received over 150 victim letters. Not one asked for leniency. He called the fraud extraordinarily evil. Peter Madoff, Bernie's brother and the firm's chief compliance officer, later pleaded guilty and received 10 years. Frank DePascali cooperated with investigators and pleaded guilty, but died of cancer in 2015 before sentencing. Jeffrey Pickauer, who had withdrawn an estimated $7 billion from the scheme, died of a heart attack in 2009. His estate returned $6 billion, the largest single forfeiture in Department of Justice history at that time. By 2024, the Madoff Victim Fund had distributed approximately $4.3 billion, reaching an estimated 94% of eligible claimants. Real cash losses, the actual money that went in and never came back, were estimated at approximately $18 billion. Mark Madoff, who had reported his father to the FBI, never recovered. On the 11th of December, 2010, exactly 2 years after his father's arrest, he took his own life. He was 46 years old. His brother Andrew died of cancer in 2014. He was 48. Bernie Madoff applied for compassionate release in 2020 citing terminal kidney disease. The request was denied. He died in prison on the 14th of April, 2021. He was 82 years old. He was cremated, a detail that sat uncomfortably against his Jewish faith. His remains were held with his attorney for a period. His family did not immediately claim them. It was a quiet and strange final chapter for a man who had been surrounded by people his entire life. Trusted, admired, beloved, he died largely alone. And what he left behind was not the legacy of a great financier. It was 37,000 broken stories. And a question the financial world has never fully answered. How did it last so long? There were warnings. Harry Markopolos raised his hand again and again. The SEC had multiple opportunities. The Avellino and Bien's investigation should have ended it. But it didn't, because Bernie Madoff understood something fundamental about human nature. We trust what we recognize. We trust stability, consistency, warmth. We trust people who have been trusted by people we respect. We trust the man who has already been investigated and cleared. And we stop asking questions when the answers have always been so reassuring. He built his fraud not on greed alone, but on trust, on the deep and very human need to believe that the person holding our future is worth believing in. The woman from the beginning of this story, the one who did everything right, is still here, still rebuilding. 37,000 people are. And one day, it will all come together. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and comment if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to this channel for future stories.